Is that true?
Michelle's in San Diego. I'm in LA.
In where?
Los Angeles.
Oh, okay.
So it looks like we are live now. So welcome everyone to Wine, Women, and Words. My name is Michelle, and with me tonight is Diana, as always. And joining us tonight is Seth Margolis. And if I just butchered your last name, please let me know.
No, that was pretty good, actually.
Okay. And you're joining us tonight to talk about the amazing books, the Semper Sonnet.
I love seeing it held up like that. I have to do the same. All right, end of plugs.
I can't do it because I gave Michelle my copy, so I'm doing it in spirit.
I'll get it back. I'll send you a check so you can go buy another copy, but you might not get it back. But we are very happy. We have had an author on our show in the past, but it's always exciting to be able to chat with an author of a book that we both enjoyed so much. And I know we've had some technical issues. For some reason, Google Hangouts, every time we try to do it live, it throws a curveball. And I don't know how I ended up being the tech guru of this outfit, because I am not techy at all.
All right, my charger is plugged in. I'm ready to go.
Excellent.
Alrighty.
So I guess to get the show started, this is Wine, Women, and Words. So we have to ask, what is your favorite beverage to enjoy when you're kicking back on a quiet Thursday night?
Well, I mean, normally it would be wine. There's not a lot of beverages that I really don't enjoy, but I'm here in New York City, so it's actually 11 o'clock or almost 11:30. So by now I'm usually through wine, and there's a little fall nip in the air, so I poured myself a little bit of scotch. Can you see that?
Oh, nice.
Nice.
Yeah, it felt a little Elizabethan, and it felt autumnal, if that's a word, and so that's what I'm having.
We have zero fall weather here. It's like I don't know how hot it is for you, Diana.
It's in the mid 80s still. I have the air conditioning running right now, and it's 8:30 at night.
Yeah, it's hot down here too. It was like I think in the low 90s maybe, or it might have cooled down into the 80s, but it's still hot.
We pretend to have fall on the West Coast. It's like a game we like to play.
Right, but yeah, we're not quite there yet, but it was a little nippy today. It's actually kind of nice. I like the fall in New York, so I'm not unhappy about it. And it's an excuse to drink scotch.
Yeah, exactly.
Well,
when I lived in New York, fall was my favorite season. I found that the most tolerable season to live in New York.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's a lot happening, and it's just very comfortable. I really like it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm moving to Chicago at the end of the year, so I'm moving like right in the middle of winter, and I haven't been in winter in a very long time, so I don't really know how I'm going to handle that. Lots of wine, I think.
Winter in Chicago is real winter.
It's exciting.
Yeah.
So veering back, Diana, did you want to take the next one?
Sure. So for our very first podcast, we did an episode of our favorites, what our favorite books are. What are a few of your all-time favorite reads?
Oh gosh, that's such a hard one to answer. I mean, I love a book that I've read. I think I first read in high school, and then I read it again in my 20s, and then both my kids had to read it in high school, I guess, so I read it with them. And then I probably read it once since then, is The Great Gatsby. I've read that, I can't count the number of times. So I'd have to put that right up there. And anything by Charles Dickens, I love Dickens, and I haven't read him in a number of years, but I've read pretty much everything he wrote, and that's a lot. He was very prolific, and I admire that about him too. So anything by Dickens, Madame Bovary, I love. I read a lot of mysteries, and I write mysteries, and a lot of suspense novels. Right now I've been reading a series of novels by Philip Kerr, Kerr, that take place before, during, and I think just after World War II in Berlin. And I love I love suspense set in the past. And he writes, he has an ongoing character, a detective. Bernie Gunther is his name, and I really enjoy his books a lot. I just discovered him this year, so I read him. I love reading things that are funny, although there's not a lot that's funny, frankly, but I read everything Christopher Buckley writes. I think he's really funny. Yeah, so that's sort of an eclectic group of what I like to read.
And our to be read list, I mean, I know Diana constantly adds new books, and I don't even know when I'll be able to get to my to be read list, but do you have books that you constantly say, oh, I'll have to get to that eventually?
You know something, at this point in my life, I've gotten to them. There are books that I've never been able to get through that I feel kind of guilty about, which is probably a more appropriate list for me. So I've never gotten through Marcel Proust. I've started Remembrance of Things Past about 6 times, and I think I've gotten maybe 150 pages in and then just kind of abandoned it. I did make it through War and Peace Moby Dick a few years ago, and actually had a great time with it. Although I skipped over a lot of the really, really dense parts about tying ropes and things like that. I'm trying to think of what's on my list that I feel bad about. You know, everyone says War and Peace. Never got around to that. But I think that's about it. I think I've checked all the boxes. Well, I think you could, if you challenge me, you could probably find all sorts of books that I haven't read that I probably should have. But I feel pretty good at the moment that I've read most of what I think I want to read. I'm talking about classics now. I'm never short of a book to read. So
often I'm reading like 3 at a time. Got one by the bedstand, one loaded on my Kindle, and then one for every day.
Really? I can't do that. I wish I could, and I know a lot of people who do that, but I don't know why. I think I would become confused and distracted. I've never been able to read more than one book at a time. And I would never know which one to pick up at what point. It seems like too much of a burden, so I've never been able to do that.
And can I just...
You're literally a monogamist.
Yeah, yes, I'm a literary monogamist. That's a good way to put it.
And I just love, off topic, but I love the fact that you're sitting in front of your bookcase. I think that's like the perfect setting. Oh,
am I? Is that what you're seeing behind? Is that what you're seeing behind me? Yeah. This is actually the dining room. So we live in an apartment on the Upper West Side of Manhattan, and which is where I've lived. My wife and I have lived for 30 years, I guess, and we've raised our 2 kids here. They've now flown the coop. And so we are fortunate to live in Manhattan and actually have a real dining room. And so what you're seeing, I'm sitting at the end of our dining room table, and then behind me are bookshelves. So.
Oh, well, it totally looks like a study, so I would have never guessed.
Yeah, it's kind of, well, the other thing about when you live in an apartment, I can actually give you a little tour of it. Every room doubles for something else. So this is actually where I've written most of what I've written.
Okay.
At this table, yeah, because especially when the kids were here, we had no extra rooms at all. So this was the room that I wrote at. So.
Well, that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Now, when Diana first told me about this book when she was reading it, and she instantly knew that I had to read it, and she was absolutely right. So when I started reading it,
words were, this book is screaming, Michelle, once I finish it, you need to read it.
Sorry, my phone just keeps giving me this weird signal that I'm losing power, so. Okay, should be good. I'm curious, Diana, how did you find the book?
Your publicist messaged me about it and asked if I was willing to review it for my blog. And he was like, it's a little bit out of your normal reading. And I was like, well, and I took a look at it, and all I saw was Shakespeare and then a female lead. And I was like, that's it. I'm sold.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, I was like, okay, I'm going to give this a try. And then, yeah, that's when I read it. It was one of those great summer reads for mysteries. Yeah, and then I passed it off to Michele, who loves suspense and thrillers. I'm the historical fiction girl. She's the mystery girl. So you got both of us.
Yeah, that's a little of both. Yeah. Oh, you're the perfect audience then.
Yes.
So when I started reading it, I told her it feels like it's like The Tudors, because I don't know how many times my mom and I have watched the Showtime series, The Tudors. It's like The Tudors meets The Da Vinci Code, and then you have Outbreak thrown in at the end.
Now that would be a great slug line for the back of the book. Yeah.
So where did the idea come from for Semper?
You know, it's so hard to think about the actual beginnings of it. I would say, so like you, Michele, I've always been really interested in the Tudor period of England, Henry VIII in particular, but also Elizabeth. And, you know, it's one of those periods in history that just seems to have given rise to so many larger than life characters, you know, so of course Henry and of course Elizabeth, but, you know, and of course Shakespeare. So there's, you know, there's a great number of writers and philosophers, but also, you know, Sir Walter Raleigh and Sir Francis Drake and Wolsey and Cromwell, and, you know, just these incredible characters, Sir Thomas More. So I've always loved that period. I've read a lot about that period. And, you know, one of the things that always interested me was that, you know, the greatest figure of that period, at least the greatest political figure, who was Elizabeth, possibly also her father, you could say, was equally great, you know, never had a child. So the entire dynasty that we're also interested in just died out with her. And I always thought, that's such a shame. I don't think anyone quite has lived up to that since then, lived up to the sort of standard she set, certainly not the current crop. And so I've always thought, like, you know, wondered, you know, why she didn't have children. And then if you're a writer, you start thinking, you know, I guess all books begin a little bit with a what if question. So I thought, well, what if she had a child? So that was sort of the premise. I just wanted to write about that period. But I also wanted to be, I've had a couple of books that weren't mystery or suspense, but generally I wanted to write a suspense novel. So I thought, well, what would be suspenseful about that? And I wanted to set it somewhat at least half of it in the modern day. And I thought, well, whether or not she had a child, why would that matter in the 21st century? Who cares? It would be sort of interesting for people like us who are interested in that period, but why would it matter that Elizabeth had a child? So then I thought, well, what if, you know, the identity of this, or the fact that she had a child, in fact, led to something even bigger than that, and something that, you know, posed a threat in the 21st century. And it was sort of that evolution that got me thinking about writing this. So it started with the what if she had a child, and then I thought, well, how do I make that, you know, it's interesting to those of us who are interested in the 21st century, but how do I make that relevant from a suspense point of view? And that's where the whole idea of Semper came along, and sort of connected the 16th century with the 21st century.
Yeah, the disease that you talk about in there that some of the people have, that is a creepy disease. Is that an actual disease, or is it something?
No, I made it up. The disease that the family in Massachusetts have is sort of based on something real that I had done some consulting work for a pharmaceutical company several years ago, and there's this very, very rare syndrome that involves people having chills and you know, sort of never being able to be warm, and that was sort of the germ of the idea, pun intended, for what this family had. They weren't affected by Semper. It was just this genetic condition that was passed down from Elizabethan times to the present time. It just seemed like an interesting way to connect the family all the way through, that they had passed on this genetic inheritance. So, but the Semper, no, I completely made that up.
Yeah.
So I did some research on
creepy diseases.
Ecophagy. What was that?
I said kudos to you for creating some creepy diseases. I just got to say that.
always fun to create a creepy disease. I did do a little research on ecophagy because I wanted to sort of, to make it at least semi-plausible. I thought, well, could a bacteria actually live inside a vessel for hundreds of years, right? Wouldn't it need some sort of host that was alive? So I did a little research to find out if that was theoretically possible, and it's possible, though it's never been proven. So that's the extent of the reality, was that if this bacteria existed 500 years ago, it could have been locked up in the Semper vessel, and it could still be alive after all these years. But beyond that, I made the whole thing up.
Now, at least for me, when I'm writing, sometimes it can take me forever to come up with the right name for a character, or a description. So how long, I'm curious, did it take you to come up with Semper?
You mean to actually write the whole thing?
No, the name, just the term Semper for the name of the disease and the title.
Oh, interesting. Now, let me think about that. I'm not sure at what moment I came up with the name. That's a really good question. I think I'm not even sure. Isn't that funny? Somewhere along the line, I know I did not start the book thinking it would have Semper in the title. It's somewhere along the line. I think it was when I was writing the scenes where the Spaniards discover it in South America, and they call it Semper. Maybe that would be the good name for it. So I don't really know, actually. But names are hard, though, and I always. What's that?
I'm sorry?
No, what were you going to say?
Oh, I was going to say, this is why all authors are magicians. Just for everybody out there to know.
Yeah. Yeah. But names are really, it's funny that you mentioned the name of the book, but names of the books are hard, names of characters are hard, and I always name things unconsciously and then end up having trouble. Or accidentally, let's say. I mean, the very first book I wrote, which was a mystery called False Faces, the lead character was named Carol, and after I had finished it, and it was with St. Martin's Press to be published, I met and married my wife, whose name is Carol. So I had to call my publisher and frantically say, "You must change the name of the character in this book." It was fate that I had come up with the name before I met my wife. But and in the book that I just finished, that'll be published next year, there's a character named Benny, and my sister Jane, who's a wonderful editor. She's that's not her profession, but she reads my manuscripts, and she said she sent back some comments on this book and said, but the only thing now that I've graciously, commented on the book, you need to change the character of Benny. And I said, why? And she said, well, Seth, how obvious, my son is named Benjamin. You can't name this villainous character. It never occurred to me that it had anything to do with him. And she said, well, it did occur to me. So I don't know how that happens. I mean, I don't think he was related to the character at all, but it's happened a number of times where I realized characters have some sort of, the names, if not the identities of the character, have a real life counterpart. I have to go back and change them all. This is much easier now in the search and replace with Microsoft Word than it was with my first book, where I had to go through the whole thing and change the character's name.
Well, speaking of with the research and everything, researching names, researching places, with historical fiction, it's so important that we get a good chunk of it right, because I would consider this a good, a crossover between mystery and historical fiction. Mm-hmm. What can you say about the research that you did to try to make it as historically believable as possible?
Yeah, so I did a bunch of different kinds of things. I first did a lot of book research. There's a book by a writer named, I think it's Liza Picard, called Everyday Life in Elizabeth's London. I think it's a wonderful book. I would have been happy to read it even if I weren't using it for research. And it's just full of really rich details about what it was like to, not just to be the Queen of England during that time, but to be an ordinary person living in London. And I got some good medical details from that. And I read about 2 or 3 biographies of Elizabeth. She's sort of a minor character in the book in some ways, but central to it at the same time. So I read a number of biographies of her. Google, of course, is really good for that, for this kind of research. And then I went to England, and I went to 2 of the locations that figure in it. So I spent a lot of time in Westminster Abbey, as you can imagine, arousing a lot of suspicion among the, they're actually called beadles, the guards who work there, because I just sort of hung out and looked around and took notes and asked them about the infrared security devices, which I was surprised they didn't put me in handcuffs after that. Like, well, what would it take to alarm one of these? And if I wanted to disable it, what would I do? And they were actually really helpful. I don't know why they were telling me. But from the book that's actually really key, is to be able to cause all that mayhem, back in the Lady Chapel in Westminster Abbey. So I spent a lot of time there. I spent the day at, at Hatfield House, which is where an important book takes place, and then the character of Lee actually goes there early on in the novel to do her research into what's going on, and that was really nice. It's actually open to the public a few months of the year, but I was there off season, so I actually made an appointment with someone and got a private tour of the old palace where, and it's actually where Elizabeth was sort of she was kept prisoner by her sister Mary. And it was a nice kind of prison. It was a palace, but it was a prison, and she couldn't leave. And it was where you can actually see the tree that supposedly she was sitting under when word came that her sister had died, her hated Catholic sister Mary, and she was now the Queen of England. So that was sort of the on-site research, and then a lot of it is just living in New York. So a lot of the scenes were set here in Manhattan, and this is where I've spent my whole life. So that was relatively easy. And then a lot of there was some of the scientific things that have to do with Semper itself. I found research papers that I was able to download, or in one case actually had someone pick one up at a library for me that wasn't online. But so it was actually fun to research. It's the historical parts. It's a period that I love, and then the contemporary parts about the disease and stuff like that are things that it was just interesting to become fluent in.
It was really fun since I love the Henry VIII and the Tudors, and I watched that series and I've read so much about it. It was really fun to see, to almost like run into Anne or Elizabeth and Mary after. It's almost like running into friends that you haven't seen in a long time, and just kind of see what happened to them after after Henry VIII died and the succession moved on. So
it's just an amazing period. What amazes me is there are so many people. I think a lot of women more than men, although maybe that's just the Elizabeth. We're just obsessed with that period in history, and just there's something about it that there's a lot of allure. There are good read groups about it, and there's a never-ending series of novels based on events in that period. It's really amazing. There's just something so rich about particularly the royalty at that time and the literary world. Just a confluence of larger than life, brilliant characters that are bigger than fiction, really. It just attracts just a lot of really interesting people. The way that a lot of women are fascinated by Jane Austen, and there are all sorts of Jane Austen book clubs, particularly online. And my sister is something about Tudor England just attracts a similar devotion. I'm not really sure why.
And keeping on with your research, I mean, you had to write a sonnet that Shakespeare could have written. What kind of work did you put into writing that sonnet?
Yeah, so first of all, it doesn't come close to being you know, there's not one word in it that's as good as a Shakespeare sonnet. But that said, I'm very proud of what I created. That was the hardest part. I honestly, I'm trying to think back on how I did it. I know that I did it. I would write, and then I would make a note in the manuscript, need a line in the sonnet about this, and then I do a lot of traveling. I have a completely separate career as a marketing consultant, so I do a lot of traveling, and I write in the morning and then go about my life, my other life. And so I wrote a lot of the sonnet on airplanes. I would just, you know, like waiting to take off, I had 15 minutes and I'd fool around. It was sort of like putting a puzzle together, because, you know, having read it, that pretty much in the sonnet, there are 14 lines, has a hidden meaning in it. So I had a lot of fun doing that. But, you know, I'm not quite sure how I did it, because I don't know that I would do it again. It was a sort of daunting task. And you have to sort of retrofit the clues in the sonnet to what's happening in the plot, and then sort of vice versa. So it was really hard. It wouldn't fool even remotely like a Shakespeare sonnet, but it is, you know, it's 3 stanzas plus the 2 at the end, 2 lines at the end, and you know, it's in the format of a sonnet, iambic pentameter, but it's not Shakespearean. But it was a lot of fun and really tough to write, especially because you know, to embed all those clues in there was really tough.
Were all of the clues that you used, were all of those, the wordplay and the hints that Lee picked up, were all of those used in Elizabethan times? Were all those wordplay, was that real?
Yeah, it's a good question. So, the short answer is no, but the deeper answer is that the Elizabethans love wordplay. I mean, Shakespeare's full of puns, not really anagrams like I have or hidden words, but definitely double entendres, puns. The Elizabethans loved language. I think it's because the language was still kind of new, the English language. So, the notion of wordplay being something that a poet at that time, including Shakespeare, would have used is very real, and Shakespeare was a master of wordplay. But some of the specific kinds of wordplays that I included, both in the sonnet and elsewhere in the novel, my knowledge were not Elizabethan, and anagrams and things like that, or you know, hidden words, or you know, lines read backward, that kind of thing. But playing with words was very much an Elizabethan sort of pastime, I would say. Yeah, so that was really fun to explore that.
And for about Elizabeth, I've been reading a lot now during and finishing your book. I've been researching a lot about Elizabeth, and I actually, side note, had no idea that she was buried with Mary. That was new.
I missed that. What was that?
I was just saying that during, while I was reading your book and after I finished it, I started researching a lot about Elizabeth, because I didn't really know that much about her, and I actually had no idea that she was buried with her sister.
I know, isn't that the strangest thing?
I don't think Mary would have.
Yeah.
But I had no idea that there were so many myths about Elizabeth. Some of the ones that I came across was that Queen Elizabeth was actually a man, and that Queen Elizabeth was actually Shakespeare, and that Sir Francis Bacon was actually Queen Elizabeth's son. Do you think the idea that she had a son in secret not while she was queen, but while she was still a princess, do you think that could have been possible?
I guess it could have been. I mean, there's really no evidence to it. Again, I think, just as I said, that one of the reasons I started to think about writing the book was because it frustrated me that she was sort of the end of the line, you know, for the Tudors, and that the most brilliant woman in English history kind of, you know, never had issue. I think a lot of people want to believe that the same thing, and so therefore they invent stories about, you know, possible heirs and, you know, offspring, but there's really no evidence for it, although people concoct it, I guess, or, you know, read into manuscripts and things. There is some debate among scholars even about why she never had children. However, that's you know, why she never married and why she never had children. It was unlikely as a queen that she would have had a child out of wedlock. But, you know, why did she refuse to get married? And most scholars, I think, believe that she, as you know, as a, I guess, really the first monarch in her own right in English history, she didn't want to have to share power, and she knew that if she married almost anyone, he would, because, you know, he would, even though if a king marries, when the king takes a wife, she's sort of just a, you know, his sort of sidekick with that much power. When a queen marries, her husband becomes king, and he would presumably share power with her. And I don't think she ever wanted to do that. And then others think that she knew that if she got married, she would have to, you know, she'd be expected to have children, and she was, you know, terrified. Infant mortality was very high then, but so was death in childbirth for the mother. And, you know, she wasn't just a coward in terms of worried about her own death, but she was worried about what it would do to England if she died suddenly. And so she was just determined never to put herself, and therefore put the realm, at risk. So I think that's generally the most accepted reason that she never married. Plus, she was a master at playing off all of this for her hand in marriage. So the nobles at her court, Sir Walter Raleigh and other prominent, Leicester, all of the romantic figures at court, she played one off against another, and it kept them loyal to her. And she did the same with foreigners, with foreign nobility, including, you know, the King of Spain and dukes in France. She kept, you know, sort of, you know, sending her emissaries abroad to ask about the, you know, the possibility of marriage, and it kept them kind of not exactly on her side, but, you know, currying favor with her. So she used her eligibility as a something to bring power to herself and to England. That's, I think, the most plausible thing. But again, you know, a lot of people just can't accept the fact that the most brilliant monarch in history, and certainly in English history, you know, just ended. And so they want to think that something of her lives on. And, you know, from my book, that I'm one of those, but I don't know that I believe it.
Well, looking at some of the research that Michele did, one of your books here, Losing Isaiah, got turned into a movie. Is there any talks about getting Semper Sonnet option for that? Or? Well,
so my agent is discussing it, but nothing really is happening. I mean, there's no deal yet. It would, if you think about it, be a very hard novel to film for a lot of reasons. First of all, you know, the wordplay, which is central to it, would be hard to visualize. I can think of ways you could do it, but, you know, film is a visual medium, and the Semper Sonnet is very much about words and the meaning of words, so that would be hard. I don't think it would be insurmountable. My agent, the feedback she's getting from producers is it's really complicated. It would be a very hard script to write because it's a complicated plot, and it would be expensive because it takes place both in Elizabethan times and in current day. So it would be very costly to make. If it all took place today, it would be relatively inexpensive. And if it all took place back then, it would be expensive, but not that bad. But the fact that you would sort of have to create two entirely separate worlds would be expensive. So she's still in negotiation, you know, talking to producers, and I would love to see it happen. But yeah, that's been the feedback so far. So we'll see.
Yeah, hopefully, because I mean, I loved Lee's character. I loved her, and, you know, Leslie was just. I think we need more characters like her in literature and in television too. She had that feel like what's his name, Robert from the Dan Brown novels. I loved how she had that independence and that fierceness that you typically see with the guys in these books. There is like this role reversal between with the genders I don't know, was that on purpose? Was it just you thought it'd be a cool character to have, or?
Yeah, I like that aspect of it. I just thought, when I thought about, once I had sort of thought in my mind of the contours of what the book was going to be, I thought, I thought it would be interesting to make her a female character, just because, as you say, that character is typically a male character in most books, right? The intrepid person who, against all rational warnings, goes off and tries to find the truth. So I thought it would be just more interesting if it was a woman, and at the same time I really wanted the parallel between, and you see how it ended up, I wanted a parallel between her and Elizabeth. So two strong women, and Elizabeth, actually I quote it in the book, I wish I could remember where it was, where Elizabeth said, though she's a queen, she's still but a woman, and limited in terms of what is expected of her and the power. So I thought it's sort of ironic that Lee lives in the 21st century, and though she's just a commoner and a student, in some ways she has more freedom than the greatest queen of England, one of the greatest monarchs ever, because of what women are able to do in the 21st century that even the Queen of England couldn't do in the 16th century. So I thought it'd be interesting to contrast the two. And then of course there's a connection between them, which we won't talk about. But it was mostly that I just thought it would be interesting to parallel the two lives, 500 years apart, and the sort of some of the ironies of, the freedoms and the power that even just an average woman would have in the 21st century that the Queen of England didn't have way back then. So, but I just thought it would be much more interesting to make her a woman and sort of set the book apart.
I think it was really interesting that, when you read suspense novels and you have like the ordinary person thrown into extraordinary circumstances, a lot of times they still know what to do. But if I had to run from the police and get out of the country, I wouldn't know how to get a passport. And so I love that she basically Googled it to figure it out.
Yeah, I don't know what I would have done without Google. Well, I don't know what my character would have done, but yeah, it is fun, and that's another part to make it plausible, even in the current day. That she could elude the police and she could get a passport. But I actually did some research on that with these sort of these anti-government groups, who you can find on the internet, if you search for them. And I did find some who will help you create new identities to stay, one step ahead of the government, because the government is bad and is, so there are people like that out there. There are groups out there that she connected with in order to create a new identity for herself. But I'm not sure I would have been that resourceful in real life.
Do you have any plans to bring Lee back in other novels, or is Semper her only one?
Well, I think I would. I kind of really like her as a character, and there is a secret about her at the end, and it occurs to, I've already sort of thought about what I would do with her. I think if I do bring her back, which I probably will, I would do it in a way that she is, through her connections to Elizabethan England, comes across another unsolved mystery with potentially dire consequences for the 21st century. So it would be the same sort of framework, and because I like that, and it would still be structured in the same way, but it wouldn't. I have to think about how, the Rufus Hatton, the doctor. I don't think I could use him again. I think he played his role with his diary, and that's the end of him. And I don't think it would be a long lost sonnet, but word games is a sort of minor obsession of mine, crossword puzzles and cryptic puzzles and anagrams. So I'd probably include some of that in it. So yeah, I'm almost certainly not through with her. But I have another book coming out next year that has nothing to do with the Semper Sonnet. So it'd have to be the book after that.
What can you tell us about this book that you've got coming out next year?
Oh, so it's coming out. It's totally different. This is a source of frustration to my agent and actually to me because I never seem to write the same book twice. So this book is called President's Day, and it's a contemporary thriller, political thriller. It's actually coming out on President's Day in February, and it's about a billionaire, a multi-billionaire businessman in New York who, for very, very personal reasons, which I won't reveal because it's part of the mystery of this story, decides that he's going to essentially buy himself the White House. I wrote this long before Donald Trump was a candidate for president. But definitely true life has overtaken fiction in this case. This guy doesn't run for president, but he decides essentially to purchase the presidency, and so it's a political thriller. And as I said, having nothing to do with Semper Sonnet. So we'll see, if some of the same readers who read Semper will be interested in it. I don't know. It appeals to a very different audience. So.
And I have one more quick question about Semper, because sure. Towards the end, Lee writes her own little sonnet, and she has little clues hidden in there, it sounds like. Are there ways that we could figure it out?
Well, yes, and the thing is, I don't know. It's the wordplay. I'm looking for it now in the book. That is not. I never give the solution to it. I mean, I do English crossword puzzles. I do every day. I do the one that's published in The Guardian, which you can get online. And so anyone who solves The Guardian crossword puzzles will be able to solve that particular bit of poetry. So I don't. Yes, you can definitely solve it if you apply yourself, and if you send me an email afterwards, I'll tell you how to do that. I don't know that I should do it now because I can't find it to say what it is, but there's a message in it from Lee to Elizabeth that she sort of writes on this piece of paper and then throws overboard with the vessel. So and if you can solve it, I just put that in there for fun and decided I wouldn't. I wouldn't give the answer to it. I wouldn't reveal it. I just thought it would be sort of fun and diabolical to make readers try to figure it out. So.
Well, I think that was all of my questions. Anna, did you have any others for Seth?
I think the general one for all us writers or wannabe published writers out there. What advice do you give for people who want to be a writer?
Oh, well, so I just was reading a memoir, review of a memoir by Robert Gottlieb, who's this very famous editor at Alfred Knopf, I think is where he was. And he edited a lot of very prominent writers, both living and dead. He's in his late 80s now. And he said that whenever his writers were overdue, they were blocked, or they had long passed their deadline, he would always say to them, "Don't write, just type." And he would say this to Kurt Vonnegut and some of the greatest literary stylists. He would say, "Don't write, just type." And I know what he meant. Sometimes you just have to get the words out. I used to say this to my kids when they were having trouble writing their papers for school. I would say, "Don't worry about it. Just fill the page." And then the fun part, the easy part, is to go back and make it better. Just get what that's like. You're both writers. Just get the words out on the paper, and then you'll find you can go back and make them better. Don't edit yourself. Don't stifle yourself. Don't block yourself. Just do it. And that was his advice. Don't write, type. And the other thing I say is I always talk about an anecdote. So a writer that I admire a lot is Graham Greene, and I've read he was very prolific. He wrote serious novels, religious novels, light humorous novels as well. And he lived a very sort of glamorous life as well. And there's a story about him on a yacht in the Mediterranean that was owned by, I think it's Alexander Korda, a famous director or producer in Hollywood. So he was his guest on his yacht, and every morning he would go on deck with a pad of paper. This was long before computers, obviously, and he would write one page by hand, in longhand. And at the end of, he would get to the end of the page, and even if he were mid-sentence, he would stop and he was done for the day. And he would, of course, his style was that he would go back and edit that page. But he would just write one page, handwritten, a day, stop, and then he would live the great life on the yacht with all these celebrities and movie stars and things like that. And by doing that, he basically wrote and published a book a year. Because if you write a page a year, by the end of the year, you have 365 pages, and that's a book. And he did that every day, 7 days a week. And I say that to writers too, is that you don't, I've virtually never written full time. I've always had another job, and I like it that way, actually. And you don't just get the words down, write a page a day, and by the end of the year, you'll have the first draft of something, and then go back and rewrite it, and then rewrite it again, and rewrite it again, and edit it and edit it and edit it. But just get that first draft out. That's what that's like. You're both writers. It's the hardest thing. I find it so much more pleasurable to go back and make a sentence better than to think of what that first sentence should be. So anyway, that's my best advice, is just to write.
All right. Well, I think that actually wraps up our evening with you, Seth. But thank you so much for joining us.
Fun.
We had a wonderful time.
That was fun for me. It's great, both of you.
Oh, yes.
I will. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Diana.
I was just going to say, it was great to actually meet you and talk to you face to face and pick your brain about the book.
Oh, it's great. It's wonderful to discuss it. It's a very strange and gratifying experience to hear people talk about characters that you created as if real people, and stories that you made up as if they really happened. It's just a wonderful experience. I love doing it. So thank you so much.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you. And for everyone who is watching or has been watching, the book again is The Semper Sonnet by Seth Margolis. And let us know what you think when you finish reading it. And if you do pick up a Guardian crossword and figure out what the second sonnet is, let me know, because I really want to know.
Or send me an email. Send me an email and I'll tell you. I'll be happy to do that.
But Michele, you have to work for it. You need to work for it. You can't just take the easy way out. That's totally cheating.
That's true. Spend a little time.
Yes, I'll try.
Oh, that's great.
Well, thank you again, and we will be back next week. We'll be starting a new book. Next week is, we'll start our October read, which is The Woman in Cabin 10 by Ruth Ware for our Halloween book. And thank you, everyone. Diana, did you have anything else that you wanted to add?
Nope, I'm good.
All right. Well, thank you again, Seth. It was so much fun talking with you.
It was really my pleasure. Thank you for your kind support for the book. I appreciate it. Enjoy the rest of the evening.
Of course. Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.